Sup Shredders, my name is Logan, aka Spiderhands, and welcome to an SP Reacts, where today we have ourselves 3 tracks off of an album from an act named Paul James, titled Baby It's Just Fine. And if we switch over to here, we have ourselves the album art on the screen, but we're actually going to be checking out Without You first, because there's 8 tracks on the online version of the album. It's been released via Spotify and other digital streaming platforms, but then there's also a couple of singles. So the idea is that these 10 tracks total form the actual CD itself, the whole experience. We're going to listen through each of these 3 tracks from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Starting with Without You, let's go, let's do it. Very used with the woodwinds here.
I'm a wolf without a moon when you're not around. My right is now left and my up is now down without you.
Great infusion of those
When
strings
I'm
there.
Without you, I'm flying through space, searching for Neptune, sailing to Alaska, to surf in Cancun without you. When I'm without you,
Beautiful harmonies as well.
I'm all out of sorts, baby, it's true. 'Cause when I'm all alone, I'm nothing, nothing without you. Baby, I'm blue. I'm running with the bulls in a hot air balloon, thinking it's July when it's actually June without you. When I'm without you,
Great sub-layering of those guitar parts in there. It's nice to add a depth in the
my
mix.
heart is at the station waiting on the 10 o'clock train. High noon desperation, like a fool in the rain.
Parallel major.
Without you, when I'm without you, I'm losing my mind, blind as can be without you in my life. I'm a sailor lost at sea without you. Come rescue me.
Switch in tempo, guitar lead and foley of the storm. Nice.
Monsoon, typhoon, hail the size of Texas. All I ever got was help from my exes. Tsunami, you got me. 'Cause when I'm with you, there's nothing, nothing I can do. Baby, living without you would drive me insane. 'Cause living without you ain't living just the same. Without you, when I'm without you.
Excellent. Fantastic start to proceedings and a solid first impression. So I think that Without You is about a man who's realizing just what their life is without this other person in their life. They discuss all the adventures and things they want to do, how they're searching for things and can't find them, the storm that they're weathering, with really adept use of Foley to sort of create that kind of environment within the piece there that kind of makes it sound like the person's going through a storm, going through tsunami. It sounds very cold, like they are alone, and I think the woodwinds kind of help facilitate that with a kind of an exotic sort of tone to that. But ultimately, I think it's a song that a lot of people will be able to relate to. It's certainly quite meaningful to Paul James, as well as the lady vocalist who was also involved doing some sort of kind of backing vocals and harmonies and stuff like that. And yeah, it was really well handled, I think. So I think one of the things that works well within this track is how earnest the vocal performance is. We can clearly sing and we're comfortable with a bit of vibrato and like legato occasionally there. The melodies navigate the various chord progressions and bass lines quite well. It sounds tender, like we're being sort of like gentle. We're calling out, but not in the way where it's meant to be aggressive or, even to assertive necessarily. It sort of sounds like someone who is lost, waiting to be found, to be found. And I think just when you have that first track, when you listen to it, it really is important to kind of make that matter, because if there's any issues with the vocal performance or singing in general, whether it's technique or in terms of the approach with the way it harmonizes with the rest of the instruments, the way the different harmonic elements or different vocal tracks work with each other, it's hard to recover from that. So I think that's a great first sort of step. But it's also just structurally, compositionally interesting. Like, we don't just have several different chord progressions and bass lines per part there. We adjust with various instrumental layers through even within sections there, incorporating various sort of string sections on sort of like returns to, and we have like subtle kind of guitar lead and arpeggios and stuff like that. We have alternate woodwind leads as well, and sort of guitar solo sections and such. And we're very comfortable having a track roll a bit longer with the intent that it will be more compositionally, just intrinsically intriguing. We don't just take for granted that our vocals will be enough. So I think that it's smart to make allowances across the board within your music, especially if you're, comfortable with exploring a lot of different textures and timbres, but you're also able to stitch them together in a way that makes sort of audible sense. And it's simply allowing even sort of tempo changes as well. When we got to the tsunami bit a bit later on there, it was just a very sort of organic approach to that, where structurally you don't actually get that a lot in a lot of modern music. So I'm appreciating the fact that we were able to be more flexible. Like, you can see the ship, going into it, with the storm behind it. It's very intense imagery there. You can kind of imagine the rush of in that danger being fraught with it. And it does really seem like it makes it sort of intimidating. It sounds intimidating, even though I think the final thing I'll mention in terms of positives for this track are that harmonically, it works around the inherent sadness of the situation they're discussing in a way where it also doesn't overdo it. There is a lot of color and warmth from a lot of the elements, such as the guitar and bass parts there. And it's not like the drums are kind of stuttering along or anything like that. They're sensible and sort of firm in their pace. But there's also a lot of space for things to sort of hang there and kind of simmer in the ether there. We allow parts where there are simply not any drums or sort of movements forward. Like, we are slowly, well, almost like we're stuck at the same time, I suppose. So maybe the way to sort of think about it is potentially that when the drums are there, we're trying to sort of make baby steps forward, but whilst also acknowledging that it's difficult to do so. But I also think the articulation of the keys in the earlier parts of the track and throughout the song, just the way it's balanced across the hands, the way that it sort of incorporates a sense of almost a maturity and sophistication harmonically there. It's just got a really sort of sweet tone as well. But it doesn't like oversaturate with like the low end or anything like that, or even with the minor chords. There's still an inherent sort of brightness, like a silver lining to it, I suppose, in a weird sense. And you have like these massive points of like sub bass there, where it's great. We'll talk about the studio production in maybe the next track, and if not, like the end. But just also the way that the vocals are layered in sub parts to be sort of like an upper melody on top of the track. It's one of the reasons to have like a lady and a male vocalist if you can, because they simply just riff off of each other really well within the frequency spectrum. But I think that it's a sort of like a mature approach to clearly a less sort of positive topic that is done with some interesting imagery, like lyrically. And ultimately, I just feel it's the way that you have that weight from elements like the strings and stuff like that, as well as the harmonies of the minor orient, was still having some sort of like shimmer and sheen, like with the guitar takes and the kind of crispness and warmth of those. So ultimately, well done. But we've got Giving Hell to Me, track number 2 for today. Straight into it.
she's in heaven in that club downtown, where the band's always hot and they're never too loud. You can hear yourself think, and the price of the drinks are still cheap. Lord, this getting
I like the undercurrent of the 16th note groove there on the cymbals.
hell to me. Well, is it hot in here? Or is
Interesting
it
panning of
just
elements there as well.
This half-empty barroom, this whole empty drink. There's no conversation. I'm trying, but I just can't leave. Lord, this going to heaven is giving hell to me. Lord, this going to heaven's giving hell to me. This trying to do better ain't all that it seems. I'm looking for the right chance to break free. Lord, this going to heaven is giving hell to me.
It's kind of an interesting sort of melody there. It's a nice trade-off from the context of the chorus vocally.
I'd be holding an angel if I would have stayed. Now I'm sitting on nothing. She's holding an ace. I bet that she's better. I bet that she's glad that she's free. Lord, this going to heaven is giving hell to me. Lord, give me the strength to walk out that door. Now everything's spinning, but when I find the floor, I'm gonna do better. I'm gonna be just who she needs. Lord, this going to heaven is giving hell to me. Lord, this going to heaven's giving hell to me. This trying to do better is a field of dreams. I'm looking for the right chance to break free. This trying to be good is bad as can be. If heaven were easy, it wouldn't be free. I keep taking a shot, but it's a chance that I need, yeah. Lord, this going to heaven is giving hell. It's giving hell. It's giving hell to me.
It's a lovely resonance at the end of the track with the keys and strings and fiddles and everything like that. Eh? Now, well done. We'll talk about this track in a minute. So my interpretation of the second track for today, Giving Hell to Me, is that it's about someone who is in a club or a bar and they're drinks and they're stuck in there and it's a hell of an experience for them and they're not sure if they can leave and they're kind of thinking about someone they're interacting with in there and there's like a band and everyone's having fun and the drinks are cheap and etc. And then they kind of get to the point where they can't sort of stand up anymore and they're kind of struggling with it, kind of like figuring out what's real and what's not. And I think the understanding of the sort of thought process behind it is that we're kind of like just struggling with the concept of trying to be good when it's just so easy to not, you know. This getting into heaven is giving hell to me, you know. It's tricky, it's difficult to remain pure and honest and consistent with values when there's so much temptation. This was an interesting song and it was very different to the previous one. While I do appreciate the coloration of the vocals and the way we sort of sung our lines there, and I think the country kind of like twang, you know, it suited it nicely, you know. And I think that the backing vocals that we had on top or on the sides there were well rounded, and there was enough going on with the harmonies and the double tracking in order to keep that efficient and well done. And I think that the way we explained it sort of like tonally and expressed it was very good. A lot of the kind of like the value to me from this track came from and other things as well. So like the actual rhythms played on the different instruments, there was just always this consistent or constant 16th note groove, but it wasn't just played on like the cymbals or like the shakers or something like that. You also had it across other sort of plucked elements and various lead instruments, and there were whole tone sort of increments like the sort of slide guitars and other elements there. And we didn't do 16ths the entire time with the vocals. Clearly it's just that kind of it's just kind of like a really cool kind of like fun idea or concept when the piece where we kind of walking a chord note groove through the orient, and it's just this kind of underneath it, which I think is almost kind of characteristics of some types of country songs, but it's an undercurrent within it. And whether you have different guitar ideas like poking in with various sort of like major or minor pentatonic passages there, whether you have things kind of going in together, sort of feeding off each other, it works. I think there's like a kind of a fiddle on the side, and like other things that kind of sequence like that, and it's almost like, oh, we're really sort of fixating on that digga 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 kind of thing. Again, not just from the cymbals, but like other sort of like mid-range elements as well. And like sometimes in situations like these, I'd kind of prefer to have like more variety rhythmically, but I feel that because it wasn't just one thing doing it the entire time, it makes sense there. And also I think, with this track, at 3 minutes 46, it's really well fleshed out. Like we don't stay on one idea or concept too long. There is movement throughout the piece, such as, like Without You, we don't sleep on our composition. And I think we play with some really interesting major oriented armies and intervals there. We aren't afraid of having some occasional sort of like dissonances, but they're very, very mild there. We might even have some ninths occasionally for a bit of added glow in that upper register. And especially with those vocal harmonies and where the strings maybe come up a little bit or the kind of guitars come up, it's just nice to have that fleshed out, to have the low end as well, the bass and drums and time, and sort of like both, onbeat and syncopated when required, but never, taking the listener's attention for granted in terms of that. And it's just cool to also, I suppose, play with space without any sort of like harmonic and melodic elements occasionally, like, such as the start of the track we go wow 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 wow, like there's like a kind of a repeat or echo on that. And it's just great to sort of understand as well that we need to have varying intensities in terms of the overall instrumental parts as well, which is good. So rhythmically and I suppose harmonically or performatively, it's great. I just think it's also the way that we finish the track again with the kind of soft petering out of the various elements after the heaven part, and it just finishes on such a sweet sort of resonance across the board that kind of goes to the right and into the left of the stereo field. And there were some situations where we included elements within the mix that deliberately went out to the sides of the stereo field that really sort of make the track sound huge and kind of play around with expectations a little bit. I think it's just kind of like a mixture of both the way that we were attentive to the needs of the end of the track, as well as the way that we sort of exploited things in the post-production to sort of make it more kind of like exciting, I suppose, and a track that's very kind of like clear and gentle and carefree despite the subject matter. I just think if you had a full-bodied track where the stereo field was explored the entire time across the elements, that's fine, but it's just taking that one step further and doing things that are a bit more sort of like unconventional, having one instrument one side the other, sort of making it asymmetrical, which can really sort of like, make it pop off. I think in general the production was pretty tight with this one. There was some sort of like textures within like some of the drum parts and stuff like that, which sounded a little bit kind of like unusual to me, like a little bit kind of like fuzzy or something like that, which works. It's just an interesting way. I think it's more of a subjective thing where sometimes I prefer a little more sort of like body to some of the percussive elements, but like the main parts, like the kicks and the snares and stuff, were good. Although they weren't as like present as the previous track there. I think the cymbals were a little more sort of like dominant in this mix as opposed to the last one, but that's okay. That's all right. They're just different sort of tracks and different intentions, I suppose. We've got track number 3 now, My Whole Life. Let's do it. It's very colorful with the individual ingredients within this mix at the moment.
I was standing in line down at the grocery store. It was backed up quite a bit, just staring at the floor. A tap on my shoulder turned me around. My heart skipped a beat. Was this a dream I'd found?
It's an interesting approach to the way we EQ'd the main vocals. So I think Paul James's vocals there, we've filtered out quite a bit below 100, maybe even up to 150 or something like that. We've added like a reverb tail on it. And I think there's a difference in texture or sound between the ladies' vocals and Paul James's to a point where they work well together harmonically and it's well written, but they just, in terms of the production, they're just a little bit is noticeably distinct. But that just could be because they've recorded in different rooms or just preferred different treatments for their voice, you know.
How long have you been waiting? Came her words with soft and care. My whole life was my return. There was hope deep down somewhere. But she just smiled and brushed her hair back, and the ring on her left hand made me understand I'd never be her man.
Nice resolution there.
Life seems to be one endless tragic comedy, saying yes to what is wrong, saying no to what is right, never knowing where to turn, never learning from the burn. I guess what's ailing me is my whole life.
Interesting trade-off to the strings here.
Standing in line again at the corner store. It was 10:15. Someone tapped me on my arm. I turned around, lordy, what I found. She was lipstick and lace, and nothing could turn me away from that pretty face. She asked, how long have you? La-di-da-di-da. I didn't hear a thing. I was staring at her finger. She didn't have a ring. But before I could answer, her guy shows up and ruined my life. He took away my future wife. My whole life seems to be one endless tragic comedy. Looking for love I didn't find, wasting dreams and wasting time.
Well, I like that little turn with that country scale there on the guitar.
Never healing from the burn. I guess what's hindering me is my whole life. I was standing in line again this morning. She came up behind me without warning. Cowboy boots, a soft sundress, blue jean jacket. I must confess, that blonde hair, green-eyed wonder looked so fine. No boyfriend hanging round, no ring that could be found. All that I could think of was to say, how long have you? She just stopped me cold and said, my whole life is about to change. It don't seem wrong, it don't seem strange. Guess all the time that I've been wasting, pouring dreams and never tasting, gave me a chance to learn. You can't find love until you burn. I guess what's ahead of me is my whole life. Oh, I guess what's ahead of me. I guess what's ahead of me is my whole life.
Excellent. Cool. Interesting decision on the strings there. Okay, so that was nice. That was a really interesting track. It's nice to sort of finish the day on this, I suppose. My whole life. And so this third track that we have here, My Whole Life, as I understand it, is talking about, if it's Paul James, their search, going, meeting different women and thinking, this woman could be someone that I want to get with. And then first they have a ring and then they don't have a ring. And then the boyfriend turns up. And then eventually we start running out of kind of maybe hope for it. And then eventually we find this one last woman and they say their life is about to change because it seems like they're there's positive sort of like there's potential there. And as I understand correctly, apparently this is based on a true story that inspired the song. So if that's the case, that's genuinely, sincerely fantastic. It's a beautiful thing. Life is just kind of quirky like that, you know? I think that with all of these stories, you know, people will be able to sort of like relate to it to an extent. I think that's important with music. And I know that sounds so kind of basic, but you just can't take for granted the human connection, right? So talking about things that people can understand often helps to sort of connect us, as long as it's not too generic. So I feel like the story is told well, and it's nice to have that unfurl over the timeline of the duration of the piece. I think one of the strengths of this track is that we have a relative consistency to the theme across the board. In a story where we're learning as a person, but the environment is reasonably similar, having a lot going on with the instrumental parts there across the different sort of key and guitar and sort of like string and fiddle parts makes sense, you know. There is a lot going on. And again, you have like subtle kind of picked guitar parts at the beginning there with like the vocals kind of like positioned the way they are and the key accompaniment. And that's fantastic, and it's a good sort of way to sort of like lead on to a piece. And we have again the strings come with like a lead section or a melody that kind of goes underneath what we're trying to do with a lady vocalist and Paul James. In my opinion, it starts to get a little bit busy around the midpoint, and it could arguably, and this is a subjective thing, you usually want to either add more or have less, but I suppose to sort of close my point on the consistency of the theme, in a situation where we're having similar experiences, you know, musicality, it can make sense that the music doesn't change too much. If you suddenly had massively different environments discussed, or there were suddenly different themes completely, or different chapters, then for sure, you know, have different musical parts. So I kind of understand why we had the approach we did with songwriting in that regard with this piece. There was also kind of like a freeform approach to like the rhythm playing of the elements and some parts of the piece. Like sometimes some parts weren't played absolutely in time with others, and so I lost track of like the pulse of the track a little bit. Now, you don't need to have drums and music to make it great or work really well. I find in this situation, you could have potentially had like kind of like a subtle percussive hit on occasions to kind of help sort of accent the quarter notes, to really sort of cement a placement, a position for those. Near the end, when we just have the keys and the kind of unlike the strings, you know, that's absolutely fantastic. And earlier on with the keys, the accompaniment with the guitar parts, it makes total sense. There's just some parts a little bit like in the middle where things really sort of build up, where it's almost like maybe it's trying to represent the sort of flurry of unpredictable emotions that can come through. But I'm not necessarily sure if it translated perfectly well the entirety of the time, in my opinion. Still very, very well played, don't get me wrong. It's just, I suppose, with how tight rhythmically the previous two tracks have, it was just interesting to have a more sort of like organic approach to that in this one. It's almost like a wonder stroke in terms of the way we did things harmonically. One thing I'm still kind of getting my head around with certain genres of music, such as country, is how we can talk about the difficulties we're having, but also kind of have it in a major orient. And it's kind of, I suppose, you know, if you get too sort of down and sort of minor oriented with it, it can get kind of bluesy, which is a different genre within itself, right? So I understand that we're going for almost like a brighter tone, maybe even to infer like foreshadowing for things improving at the end. It's just interesting that we have this kind of slice of life kind of aesthetic with the chord progressions and harmonies and stuff like that. And we're keeping a major, even when we're talking about the difficulties that we're having trying to find someone who we can get with. I think that if it was done specifically in that realm to sort of illustrate the things that improved, that was really smart. It was really cool. In terms of feedback, any sort of like constructive critique for this song and the others, they're just three very different experiences. Again, it was interesting to have the male vocals, Paul James's vocals, EQ'd differently to the lady vocalists' ones. And it was like, that's just a very little kind of nitpick. Ultimately, I think in general, things were done pretty well across the board. I'm going to talk about these tracks more in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of the first three tracks off of the album titled Baby It's Just Fine from Paul James, I suppose part one. Now, the three tracks we listened through today were Without You, Giving Hell to Me and My Whole Life, and I've spoken about each of these tracks individually. Without You is sort of like discussing the difficulties of not having that person in your life and sort of like going through the storm without them. Giving Hell to Me, I think, is about sort of like the difficulties of temptation, especially with like alcohol and like clubs and stuff like that are related, and the person wondering, you know, if people are better off without you and stuff like that, where you met them and looking back on it and kind of like struggling to sort of like keep things together in that regard. and My Whole Life is about going through people until you eventually find the person who realizes their life is going to change because they found you. So I think that these are interesting stories that are going to be relatable for people. I think that they're sung really well. I'm not going to give like sort of like specific individual kind of like feedbacks on various tracks. I've already done sort of mini conclusions for each. But I do think in general this thing was handled really well. We're very comfortable in our vocal range or head and chest voice. And those vibrato and legato passages we harmonize neatly both with ourselves within various vocal layers and also in terms of the actual tracks themselves. And when we did have the lady vocalist come in and sort of like sing over top of that, I think that was handled really, really neatly as well. They were very comfortable in their range as well. And we had like other backing vocalists for Giving Hell to Me, I think, track number 2 as well. They're three very different experiences, but I don't mind that necessarily if it's like a kind of I said organic a lot, like an organic approach to production where we're simply on a journey producing these tracks and putting them together in terms of a CD. I think that's fantastic. It showcases, Paul James's journey as a musician. I like that. I think ultimately across the board, a lot of these tracks were very sort of specific to the subject matter they're doing, stylistically distinct. I would suppose maybe Giving Hell to Me and My Whole Life more similar because of the country leanings without you being more distinct. It's almost kind of like if you had a distorted guitar, it'd be kind of like alternate rock without you. It's a very different sort of aesthetic to the later two. Where my comments on My Whole Life, interesting having like the major leanings harmonically despite the subject matter, it shows that we can actually do what we need to. So it's therefore deliberate in order to like kind of connect those things, which therefore sort of instantiate the idea in my mind that we understand how to make a sad song sound, and we understand how to invoke and elicit a sort of a sense of complexity within an arrangement we need to otherwise. So I feel like these are 3 very sophisticated, mature tracks that illustrate a really good understanding of like the guitar, for example, with like strummed chords, arpeggiated, so like major and minor triads. They're very comfortable with our lead passages in certain parts as well, like Without You with the solo section, and as well as, Giving Hell to Me with some of the slide elements and everything like that. The strings were used through here as well in certain sections, and I just like the coloration and warmth from those, as well as like the weight they carried in Without You, and the way they kind of were a bit more sort of like active and perky in the later 2 tracks. The keys were very sort of articulate across their sort of major and minor triads, with the right hand usually having a bit more movement and the left reinforcing a lot of the root notes. And the bass and drums were either sort of cinematic in the first track, or they were sort of more sort of like functional and supportive of the rhythms on the various sort of different drum kits. With there being an interesting absence of that within My Whole Life, it was just interesting to sort of like have more kind of string, the sort of like piano key elements there providing the groove. I still maintain you could have potentially have had like a subtle kind of quarter note accents on certain parts with like a kick or something in My Whole Life to sort of help with kind of with the positioning of things, but that's totally fine. It's a deliberate thing on their part. They clearly write music and they understand what they're doing. So thematically, the instrument makeups we have suited. We had solid vocal performances across the board. I think that, and just to conclude, it's the studio production I want to talk about, the recording, mix, and mastering. These were 3 different pieces, and I think they had different intents. I think we were very sort of attentive to the needs of the individual instruments per track, and we tried to sort of create a mix individually to sort of like tie them together into a neat bow. And I think for the most part it was handled very well. There was some interesting sort of unusual sort of like, or like just textures I noticed within Giving Hell to Me in terms of the percussion, some sort of like fuzzier bits where I wasn't necessarily, it took me a moment to kind of get used to it, but it could be a subjective thing. With My Whole Life, as well as the other 2 tracks in general, things were played pretty well, so we didn't need to do any sort of like cleaning up in post, and we could like hit the notes that we needed to. For the most part, was fantastic on the mics. We didn't need to overproduce that either. There was sufficient dynamic range and layering of elements, and we did explore the stereo field as well on the sides with other instruments, so that was pretty well handled. And it was nice and low without pumping. It's just, the comments I made on the EQing. I would assume that like we would, for our next album, for example, we'd just probably need to record all 10 tracks vocally at the same time just to maintain a sense of consistency, because there were just different tones to different vocal parts, and it was like just to kind of make the album seem a bit more sort of like cohesive, even though I know there were individual sort of like efforts kind of built up over time. But yeah, ultimately just a really good first impression again to Paul James's work. Thank you for watching my review of the first 3 tracks off of the album titled Baby It's Just Fine, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via their various social medias and their YouTube page. I think this is also on Spotify and other platforms. And stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.